Story 1. Not active anymore, but it is absolutely a part of the Uniform Code of Military Justice that just following orders is not a defense for committing a war crime. Every enlisted member swore an oath to uphold and protect the Constitution above all else, which includes disobeying illegal orders. Now, how does that play out in action? Just ask the individuals involved in the My Lai massacre, or the pilots in the video Chelsea Manning leaked who gunned down a group of civilians in Iraq. It is all lip service. Ultimately, it would be up to the officers and commanders to make the decision to resist. Story 2. You need to look up the Milgram experiments. Right after World War II, a Jewish scientist attempted to prove that people of German ancestry were less empathetic than those who were not. They created a mock scenario where a random person, unaware of the situation, was instructed to torture someone to death, with the only enforcement being a man in a white coat urging them to proceed. Ultimately, most participants complied. Although it was staged and no actual harm was done, the subjects believed they were inflicting pain. In the end, there was no significant difference between the groups. Any of us can commit terrible acts simply because an authority figure tells us to. In other words, our agreeableness and desire to conform to authority are powerful enough. Many people reference the consequences faced by soldiers in Germany who defected or refused orders, but most did not require such incentives. I believe that if consequences were factored in, adherence would likely be even higher. Story 3. You will only get distorted answers here. Reddit's downvote feature makes it the perfect echo chamber. Those who would follow unlawful orders would face prosecution if they stated this aloud here. You will find only people not following these orders here, but you will have no idea how representative this is. Story 4. Lawful and unlawful orders matter only when the action taken ends up in court, and in this case, the regime is toppled. If the Constitution is no longer relevant, and the regime claims it is legal to shoot civilians, it will require strong morals to turn against one's comrades over unlawful orders, especially if there is uncertainty about winning or prosecuting the criminals. Story 5. There are unlikely to be any active duty military personnel willing to express their intentions or concerns about going against the current administration. Story 6. He is attempting to go in reverse order to cause a revolution similar to Germany's. After World War I, the German economy was in shambles, and the public was more susceptible to the promise of better conditions. Trump and Musk are trying to undermine a strong economy and then promise to improve it through a revolution. Our memories are not that short. The generals in charge are not foolish and will not be easily swayed. Story 7. I do not see any actual responses from soldiers here, so I will give one as a veteran. You have to swear to defend the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Personally, I see enemies of the state in high places. There are multiple instances of unlawful orders given and refused throughout our history. I would rather be on the right side of history when I die. Story 8. I'm sure United States troops will refuse orders to illegally attack another country, just like they did in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Panama, Kosovo, Libya, Niger, Mali, Uganda, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Grenada, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Lebanon, Bosnia, and Serbia. Oh wait, Story 9. When I was an active Marine, I probably would have, at least for my first 2 years. After experiencing war for the first time and witnessing people die, I became disillusioned. Now, as a career active reservist, I will not follow orders that conflict with my morals. I have lived and seen enough in the last 16 years to know that I cannot blindly follow anyone. Story 10. This forum has been affected by political statements disguised as questions. Can't you find a political forum to express your opinions? Everyone understands your intentions. Story 11. I'm in the military. It's really tough because the vast majority of the orders you receive aren't technically illegal, and it's hard to fight back in any way. For example, saying, I'm not deporting anyone. I'm just fueling a jet. Or, I'm not killing anyone. I'm just signing training folders. You're required by law to follow any lawful order from the officers above us, and we swore an oath to that. If you don't follow the orders, you will go to prison. The personnel taking planes of immigrants down to El Salvador don't know who they're transporting. They just know the immigration and customs enforcement states they are illegal immigrants and that the president wants them deported. They can't just refuse, or else they will literally go to jail, and their families will be affected by that loss of income. It's easy to avoid pulling the trigger of a gun, but it's much harder to stop every single step that led you to the point where your finger was placed on it. That's literally why I'm getting out. Story 12. Same as I always have. The Uniform Code of Military Justice states we must follow only lawful orders. The Nazis did not have that, and they committed terrible acts. I do not see the point of this question. Story 13. I always thought the oath specified defend, not attack, antagonize, or otherwise threaten your own allies. I would hope that there is still more substance than just enemy of the weak. Stay tuned for the next episode. Story 14. Not US military but European. This question highlights an important aspect that stories often overlook: the significance of self-preservation. The German military carried out around 15,000 death sentences for desertion, and estimates suggest that this number could rise to between 30,000 and 50,000 for minor acts of insubordination. There are even reports of Allied forces allowing these executions to continue after the Nazis surrendered as a continuation of the law. You might not want to carry out the order, but is it worth the risk? Especially the risk of execution? In the current context, you would need to consider the consequences. Is it just a prison sentence, or will it be a death sentence? In my own country, the death penalty no longer exists, so being morally right affords a level of freedom, as you will not have to pay for it with your life. If I'm correct, the death penalty still exists for the US military but hasn't been enforced in over 50 years. However, actions such as aiding the enemy, desertion, and mutiny could fall under that category. Therefore, the question you should ask is whether it is worth the risk to you, your friends, or your family. In summary, if the risk is prison, those who simply followed orders were misguided. If the risk includes the death penalty, then the stakes for many likely outweighed their own lives. Claiming you would die for your morals is different from actually doing it. Story 15. It didn't work in Nuremberg, and it won't work now. Thankfully, I haven't been tasked with anything inappropriate, as I'm not important enough. However, if I ever were, I would take that article. Story 16. Should the question not be active US military personnel? How will you feel about your expected response of just following orders when it's all over? Story 17. Since you asked, one of the important parts of basic training is studying applicable parts of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Much of this was brought on by the just following orders defense attempted by Axis war criminals. Even after this training, did illegal actions occur? How could they not in wartime? My lie is the prime example. No system is perfect, and young armed men who see their friends killed and maimed are susceptible to being misled. Importantly, at my lie, it was an American warrant officer who threatened those committing the crime and forced superiors to call off the operation that the massacre was part of. As a young enlisted man, it was made clear to me that if convicted of such a crime, I would be on my own. As for Kent State, that's a poor example. The Ohio National Guard, under the governor's control, was attempting to guard the campus. They were not sent in to harm fellow students. Instigators knew that enough missiles, rocks, thrown would provoke a reaction from the frightened guardsmen armed with M1 rifles loaded with live ammunition. I suspect the instigators were neither shot nor brought to justice for their actions. When the National Guard is called up by the governor, it is the state militia. Story 18. This is a good time for people to search for lawful orders. They exist for the military, law enforcement, and some other fields. You cannot be prosecuted for disobeying an unlawful order. However, it is not the average enlisted troops you should be worried about. It is the one-star and colonel officers that pose a significant problem. Remember, general and flag officers are essentially political appointees. These individuals are very concerned with how Washington, D.C. perceives them. Generals and colonels need politicians on their side to advance their careers. Story 19. I don't have faith in enlisted soldiers to disobey illegal orders, but I trust that officers and generals would. It's not a guarantee, but those serving directly under Hegseth would be the ones to monitor closely. Unfortunately, the regime is aware of this as well. Story 20. Abu Ghraib was 21 years ago. Story 21. U.S. soldiers, it is the right thing to take down any dictatorship that forms in your country. You must and should do right by the people. Do not follow unlawful orders. Instead, turn your weapons on those issuing unlawful orders. Story 22. I have never met a human resources professional who wouldn't fire someone on command. I would bet I will never meet a soldier who doesn't attack when ordered to. It is not the soldier's morality that is in question. They have no chance against the lies of the ruling class. Story 23. The number of individuals on Reddit never ceases to amaze me. Please get off social media and talk to real people. Story 24. While I support your position on this issue, you chose to ask your question insincerely instead of expressing your true intentions, and that's not acceptable to me. Story 25. Active duty here. Just following orders in relation to what? I can tell you, if any unlawful, immoral, or unethical orders come down, I will not be following them. That is what separates us from them. We have a duty and responsibility not to follow orders that are illegal. I cannot say the same for others, but I wanted to share this information. Story 26. Morality aside, the just following orders excuse is illegal in international court. Many people do not realize that the entire Nazi defense at the Nuremberg trial was based on following orders. Not a single one of them denied the Holocaust. Instead, they said, "That wasn't my department," or "I was ordered to." Blame my superior. Crucially, almost all were still found guilty and executed by someone who lied about their experience in executions, leading to botched hangings that caused suffocation instead of a neck snap. There is an international, and in many countries national, responsibility to refuse an illegal order that clearly violates human rights. Story 27. I don't think you will come across a military more resistant to taking orders, whether legal or illegal, than the United States military. Story 28. I believe that someday the phrase "we were just trying to run a business" will be used in the same context as "just following orders." This depends on whether we ever hold those kinds of criminals accountable instead of rewarding them with the power to evade accountability and justice. Story 29. I'm going to leave. I have mental health appointments set up today because apparently everyone is convinced I'm not in the right mind to make such a choice and need an evaluation. Most people I work with don't know. Many believe that leaving is too big of a crime and that things aren't that bad, or they wait for a real illegal order. They're missing the bigger picture. I can see how it happened, and I can see people disregarding those sounding alarms as mentally unwell. I can also see people being too afraid of ruining their future to truly step away from an oppressive regime. If each consecutive human rights violation is only slightly worse than the last, people are unlikely to take a stand because they continue to make excuses. By the time something serious happens, everyone will merely shrug their shoulders at martial law being declared and communities being completely cleared out, including college classrooms being raided. Story 30. While I am not active anymore, I believe that this question needs some context. What are the consequences of not following orders? For German soldiers during World War II, I can only speculate. In a time of war, disobeying an order could lead to being labeled a deserter and, in the worst case, facing execution. Given the level of indoctrination in Nazi Germany and the strict adherence of most high-ranking officers, it was likely not easy to disobey any orders. If things are heading that way within the United States military, considering the current situation, if an order is unlawful or unethical, the service member has the right to disobey it. If there are repercussions for doing so, they can bring the issue to the Inspector General's office. Let's assume we are closer to the circumstances found in Nazi Germany. If you disobey an order, you may face reprimand and potentially be subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This could lead to forfeiture of pay and rank. Repeated offenses may result in being separated from the military under less than honorable conditions, which, in the United States, can severely damage future career prospects. The governor of your state can review your records after a certain period and may change them if deemed appropriate. All of this emphasizes the importance of your moral compass, but how much are you willing to sacrifice if your livelihood depends on it? If you have a family and you are the one providing for them, Is it easier to keep your head down and follow orders or to stand up for what you believe, risking your career? There are certainly actions that are inexcusable, such as war crimes, rape, and torture, that cannot be justified by claiming adherence to orders. However, I do not envy those who must choose between their conscience and their livelihood. I could assert that I would never obey an order to invade another country, but I am grateful not to have to make that decision. I still try not to be too pessimistic about America's future, and I genuinely hope we do not move in that direction. Only time will tell. Story 31. The decisions about which orders to disobey and when will not be significantly affected by the everyday soldier. What we need to see, although I doubt we will, are those difficult decisions being made by career soldiers with ranks and insignia. That is where the true influence lies, and that is what will make headlines. I do not believe that any of them have the fortitude to sacrifice their careers for an ideal. If they do, other career soldiers will turn against them. Story 32. There is a reason why the Geneva Convention's Uniform Code of Military Justice and Rules of Engagement exist. If any action goes against those three guidelines, then you are obligated to disobey. It won't be easy, and you are likely jeopardizing your career, but that is the reality. Some items are clear, such as the intentional harming of civilians or the murdering of a surrendered enemy. There are also situations that require making a choice without the benefit of legal clarity. Either way, your career is at stake, and it is a matter of being on the right side of history. All members are sworn to the Constitution, not to a single person, party, or office. Story 33. I am a veteran, but I will answer anyway. For the most part, that is what every military does. Wars may be just or unjust. It always depends on who you ask and when, or at least on the perception of them. Beyond that is objective truth, which none of us living know. But back to your question, the issue is complicated. What do I think about the average soldier on the front lines defending their nation, or the ones who invaded other nations, or the ones who secured concentration camps? All were following orders and all are judged against possibly differing standards. I judge based on the standards I have been raised with. What I find interesting is how relatively short a time it took to presumably change the ethics of people. In 12 years, people became willing to do so much to so many. Then again, how long did it take for Americans to change their ethics and commit the atrocities at Abu Ghraib? Story 34. At some point, morals supersede orders. I am a veteran now, and I can tell you that I would have already been brought before the authorities for insubordination for voicing my thoughts on the current state of affairs. As for what I would do if deployed to our northern or southern borders and told to engage in combat against our neighbors, I would lay down my arms and surrender. Why? Because Canadians and Mexicans are not enemies of America, and I refuse to bow to a tyrant. Story 35. Active Canadian military here. I am also curious about this answer. No one signed up to die in a war against the same people who had your back in Afghanistan. We have a monument on the base I live on to those who died defending you after September 11th. I have buried some friends who committed suicide after their deployments as well. In my 16 years of service, I have never heard a soldier express regret for supporting you. Not one. Story 36. It's a harsh judgment call. In the German army, if you failed your objective, you were put up against a wall and shot. Story 37. At the Nuremberg trials, the defense of just following orders was not accepted as a valid excuse for committing atrocities. The principle that individuals are responsible for their actions, even when acting under orders, was established. Story 38. A king may move a man, a father may claim a son, but remember that even when those who influence you are kings or men of power, your soul is yours to keep alone. When you stand before God, you cannot say, "But I was told by others to act this way," or "Virtue was not convenient at the time." This will not suffice. Story 39. Not an active military member, but I think something interesting would be how Milgram's obedience study actually demonstrates that it is entirely possible. In his experiment, participants were instructed by an authority figure to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person. Despite visible distress from the learner, most people, about 60%, continued simply because they were told to. It illustrates how powerful authority can be in overriding personal morals, even in extreme situations. So, in my opinion, just following orders is not merely an excuse. Psychology shows it is a real phenomenon. Story 40. The principle didn't really exist before the Nuremberg trials. I believe in it completely, but I also think about who, at what level, can decide if an order is unconstitutional, especially in a system where information and command are fairly centralized. I was on a submarine during the Cold War. If we had received orders to sink something, how would I or anyone else on board know if the order was justified? Back then, I believed the Navy and administration wouldn't order us to do something truly wrong. But now, Story 41. How do you feel? Do you think this is the first time anyone has brought this up? Every basic rules of engagement class you take covers this topic. Story 42. After Hurricane Katrina, the military went door to door and confiscated law-abiding citizens' guns in violation of the Constitution. Story 43. Having worked with Germans for years, I completely understand why they would consider that a defense. Paperwork signifies authority, which leads people to comply. This is essentially the defining characteristic of the country. They require written approval for almost everything because paperwork signed by the proper authority allows individuals to protect themselves. I was watching an old dramatization of the Nuremberg trials a while ago, and for the first time, I truly grasped the "I was just following orders" defense. It reflects a German mindset that values authority and, specifically, written approval. Individual initiative and conscience are subordinate to authority. This does not justify or excuse the Holocaust, but on a social level, it helped me better understand why most people were unwilling to oppose what happened. The government passed a law, published the law, issued orders, and people completed the necessary forms. After that, individuals simply followed through because the paperwork was in order. Story 44. Another good time to remind people of the Nuremberg defense. Story 45. Most, if not all, regular German army soldiers were serving their country, and I bet most regular soldiers had no idea about the atrocities that the SS was committing. Story 46. They think, "There but for the grace of God go I." Soldiers on both sides committed atrocities. It's war. Even in Iraq and Afghanistan, atrocities were committed, but the winning side makes the judgments. Story 47. As for following orders, it is important to engage in critical thinking. In Vietnam, some individuals followed orders while committing war crimes, raising the question, am I stopping the enemy or acting for personal reasons? Regarding the Schutzstaffel, they cannot use the excuse of just following orders because they were fully committed to the ideology. As for German sailors, I empathize with them. Their actions were focused on attacking the enemy, and they did not target innocent people. Merchant sailors understood the risks involved in their jobs. When it comes to German soldiers, such as tank gunners or artillery operators, they did nothing wrong. Most were conscripted, and only a small percentage were members of the Nazi Party. Lumping everyone in with the few individuals who committed atrocities is a tendency of modern culture. What if the United States had lost a war? Would I, as a Navy veteran, be viewed as complicit in horrible acts because another service member committed war crimes? Story 48. It should also be noted that the soldiers following orders were often under the influence of methamphetamine during most of the war. It decreases empathy when an entire military is drugged. Story 49. Our senior leaders tend to conform to authority. This behavior has shaped their careers over the past 20 to 25 years, leading to a lack of independent thinking. I find it hard to believe any senior military leader would challenge the president, and without that level of support, the lower ranks will likely follow suit. There may be a few individuals who resist, but as mentioned previously, they will be managed through removal or pressure. Story 50. Not military but a history buff, and want to note for those apparently not aware that these soldiers, clearly referring to the German military, aside from following orders, also had their own family's safety potentially at risk in some situations. If they did not comply with orders, they risked their family's safety, and no one was willing to gamble with that. Story 51. The Nuremberg defense is not a valid defense and will not protect anyone who follows an unlawful order. assuming we have a properly functioning legal system after the Trump administration is removed from the bottom of this country's metaphorical boot. Story 52. We understand what you are really asking. If it's either going against Trump, Musk, and Hegseth or following orders to invade Canada, Greenland, or shoot protesters, I am willing to bet most will choose the latter. Story 53. I wouldn't follow all my orders while working at a grocery store. I couldn't imagine following every possible instruction when given a job that involves killing. Story 54. Comparing apples to oranges. As someone who served in the post-Cold War era, the United States has done a commendable job monitoring its soldiers and enforcing a strict standard of rules of engagement. Essentially, everyone is watching each other, and everything gets reported. There are always bad actors in wars, but the United States manages to handle them reasonably well. Additionally, we do a fair job of weeding them out during enlistment, although the post-September 11 recruitment drive allowed many individuals who should not have been recruited to join. Regardless, I believe those individuals should have been held to the same standard, but it was a totally different era and country. Story 55. That defense didn't work during the Nuremberg trials, the My Lai trials, or any of the lesser-known events in the Army's history. We have higher standards and have seen how our mistakes create more enemies and cause more problems for the force. We rely on the trust of the American people to empower and support us during times of war, and that trust is lost when we aren't the heroes. There's a reason we receive rules of engagement and know your enemy briefs, and it's to be more precise in the execution of our mission. We're told to obey an order unless it is illegal, unethical, or immoral. I know it's hard to discern right from wrong when everything is going wrong, but simply following orders doesn't protect you. I had family on both sides of World War II, and it's an awkward conversation. After 18 years of indoctrination and joining during the surge, I am still certain that the soldiers of the past who simply followed orders were wrong, and that we have to be better if we want to continue to be on top and better than others. Story 56. I had a great debate on this in college, but it was not about Germans or United States troops at My Lai. I believe it is entirely based on context, which mainstream thought often opposes. In summary, enlisted troops are instruments of the government, trained as such and subjected to the directives of the government. Therefore, my opinion is that they cannot be held responsible for the actions imposed on them by their superiors. This becomes less true as one ascends the chain of command, in my opinion. However, it is challenging to make generalizations because the specific conditions are what truly matter. Story 57. For anyone saying the military would never accept orders to invade Canada or attack Denmark and occupy Greenland, I present the recent change among Republican voters when asked if Canada or the European Union is the enemy. People tend to follow their leader and disregard laws that have recently been proven to be very flexible. Story 58. I used to get into a little trouble because I wasn't an immediate yes man in the Army. I always wanted to know why we were doing something and what it was supposed to accomplish before doing it. Leadership often said they didn't want yes men, but that was not true. Story 59. Here are a couple of facts. The United States once had 17 military bases in Greenland. Permission for future bases has always been a possibility. The Danish foreign minister has noted that former President Donald Trump seeks access to Arctic minerals and aims to share rights to these resources with his associates. He also desires control over the Northwest Passage, which is located in Canadian waters. The implications are clear. Story 60. The thing is that when you are in the military, especially not as a higher-ranking person, you do not get to be a free thinker. You are following orders all the time. I am not sure how it worked in that place and time, but not everyone even gets to decide to join the military in the first place, such as with the United States military draft. Not following orders is punishable by law, and in some places and at some times it could cost you your life. So while we would all like to say that we would absolutely never do that, that just is not how it works in the real world. The monsters were those in positions of power. Story 61. I'm glad to see there are some sensible people on this site. It's amusing how confidently you discuss these unlikely scenarios. Are you willing to bet money on it? How many of you voiced predictions from 2016 to 2020 that never materialized? How many of you supported each other with claims about Kamala winning? Get a life. Story 62. This thread is a sobering read. In short, the takeaway seems to be that although the individual may not like being a modern-day soldier, they will still follow illegal orders because they want a paycheck and are too scared not to. Story 63. Service in the United States military is considered to be institutionalized, similar to the treatment of convicts and patients in mental hospitals. Recruits are mentally broken down in basic training and taught to follow orders. Those who thrive remain, while those who fail are removed. Do not expect much resistance from them if the worst occurs and United States troops are called to confront civilians or invade countries like Greenland or Canada. Consider the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. They are not military personnel, yet they are effectively kidnapping citizens off the street. Corrections officers display similar behavior. I cannot even begin to address those horrors, not to mention the actions of law enforcement agencies. They will not resist and will follow orders against the civilian population, stating, "It's their job." These individuals place complete strangers on planes without adhering to the due process outlined in the United States Constitution. Do not expect valor or resistance from the male population regarding the upholding of the United States Constitution and basic human rights. They do as they are instructed if they hold jobs of this nature. Story 64. I do not know. It is not my job. I work in medical care. We treat everyone the same and allow others to worry about the negative actions of individuals. Story 65. An oath is just a set of words that you are compelled to recite. It doesn't mean anything unless you value those words more than your own principles. Story 66. This question is frequently asked on Reddit. The answer is quite simple. Are the orders lawful? If the president is acting with the approval of Congress, then yes, it is lawful. If the president gives you an order that does not break the law, then yes, it is lawful. Story 67. While I was in the Marine Corps, this topic came up frequently in classes and courses. The idea is to have a strong and competent group of non-commissioned officers who take the commander's intent and use their own wits to accomplish the mission. We often reflect on military history and recognize instances where troops have followed unlawful orders and how to handle situations involving such orders, like the My Lai incident in Vietnam. Lower enlisted personnel from rank E1 to E3 follow orders, while more senior lower enlisted and non-commissioned officers from rank E3 to E5 carry out the commander's intent by developing strategies and delegating tasks. It is also notable that enlisted personnel and officers enlist through slightly different processes due to this distinction. Story 68. Not active anymore but recently retired after 20 years. It is a time to be quiet and reflect, as well as a time to question. Genocide is an extreme example and starting point for comparing many situations. Clearly, genocide, mass murder, and murder in general are wrong. Story 69. Of course, they had to follow orders. If you didn't, you would be considered an ally of the people you were trying to oppress. They would then imprison you, shoot you, or lock you up with the same people you refused to act against. A soldier is just another cog in the machine. Tiny cog. I bet many soldiers didn't want to follow through with orders. But with the secret police and knowing what happened to enemies of the state, would you stick your neck on the line? This is why you hope that your leader is a morally good person who stands up for what is right. But sadly, that wasn't the case with the Nazis. Story 70. I am no longer on active duty. I would like to think that I would never follow unlawful orders, but I cannot predict my mindset in any given situation. I do know that I would break every law if it meant protecting my family. If necessary, I would go to any lengths to ensure their safety. Is that answer sufficient? Story 71. Many of the extermination missions were carried out by volunteers. They admitted that they did not want to participate but felt it was wrong to let their comrades do the difficult work alone. Service members are also trained to disobey illegal orders and report them to higher authorities. Story 72. I just followed orders was never an acceptable excuse in front of a judge in the Nuremberg trial. They also got killed. Story 73. This question lacks merit. You cannot compare individuals serving in today's military to those who served under Hitler's regime. Individuals who refused to serve the Nazi regime were sent to concentration camps as a social Those who declined to commit war crimes faced humiliation from their superiors and were sent to the front lines, which was essentially a death sentence. Personnel who disobeyed orders on the front line were either imprisoned, sent to concentration camps, or executed. In summary, the consequences were dire. There is no comparison. Story 74. May I remind you all of this. I am a veteran, and trust me, it is a massive mix of people who are both for and against various opinions, so time will tell. Story 75. Ordinary Men. The Forgotten Holocaust is available on Netflix. I suspect it won't be much different. Story 76. I am very pleased to have an excellent relationship with our military attorneys who are skilled at interpreting what constitutes a lawful order. Story 77. Disobeying orders is similar to being a whistleblower. You will still face prosecution and demonization, but you must live with your decisions. Story 78. Not a military person. My dad was a Force Recon Marine. He would never violate his conscience for anything or anyone. I'm not sure if it's a Marine thing, a Force Recon thing, or just my dad being my dad. He is a person who would never stand by if there was injustice or someone in need. Story 79. That is a challenging question for many to answer. Why? Because it would present them in a way they may not wish to be perceived. The Constitution is one possible answer, but many in the military cannot claim they followed it, as they were instructed to do the opposite. Story 80. I feel like you're forgetting that at a certain point in Nazi Germany, if the wrong person heard you talking critically of the government, you would be rounded up along with your family and sent to a camp. By that time, if you were a soldier, you did as you were told, and your family and loved ones were hostages to your obedience. Story 81. This is a heavy question with deep ethical implications. The concept of just following orders has been debated since the Nuremberg trials, but modern military ethics emphasize personal responsibility. Where do you draw the line between duty and morality? Story 82. My grandpa was a World War II British commando under Lord Lovat. He liberated a camp and said that he always joked with the SS officers no matter what. They didn't always kill the young soldiers immediately. Story 83. I have an old friend who was in the army. He once said something like, all it takes is one bad order, and the soldiers won't follow it. Story 84. Just following orders to take and hold a hill or just following orders to shoot a group of civilians. Those two orders are legally separate. Story 85. Any active military member who claims they would commit war crimes or follow unlawful orders by just following orders would face imprisonment and not see the light of day for years. No response here will provide the answers you are seeking. Story 86. Prior service after Vietnam. Just glad I wasn't a soldier in Germany back then. Follow orders, yes, but not that. Story 87. It's ultimately a mindset. In Germany, we have more firmly established principles concerning the legality of orders, which may stem from our history. You might think we would know best by now. The military is not permitted for domestic use, riot control, or any traditional law enforcement activities, and we do not have a national guard for this purpose. The forces are typically deployed only in response to natural disasters. No one would even consider using them for riot control, let alone having them fire on protesters. Story 88. If you join the army, you could shoot them. However, if you suggested shooting them on Reddit, you would get banned. Story 89. Interesting question. But exactly how many illegal wars did the United States start over the last 100 years? Just thinking about Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, Palestine, Yugoslavia, Yemen, and Libya, there are enough facts to conclude that this is not credible. Story 90. Aren't all sides in the same situation? Obviously, one side may have achieved more kills compared to the others, but each military has conducted its own experiments on people or tested the effectiveness of new weapons on enemies. They will all present the just following orders argument. Story 91. It is a non-starter of a defense. As a United States service member, one has the duty to refuse an unlawful order. It is morally and legally abhorrent to do otherwise. A kingdom of heaven put it best. A king may move a man, a father may claim a son, but remember that even when those who move you are kings or men of power, your soul is in your keeping alone. When you stand before God, you cannot say, "But I was told by others to do thus," or that virtue was not convenient at the time. This will not suffice. Remember that. Story 92. It's not just about following orders. It's the whole society. One likes to think they would be the bulwark against madness, but I hate to break it to you, you would have been honored to support Adolf. If you grew up in the southern United States in the 1850s, you would have cracked the whip. Story 93. I was taught about the Milgram experiments by my family long before they were brought up in school. It's worth noting that my whole family has authority issues. Most of us are on the autism spectrum. We are descended from crime families. We don't do church. We don't care about the existence or non-existence of God. Moving on. It doesn't seem like something you'd teach a child, but it is something you should teach children about. It's something you should teach them about as soon as they are aware enough to grasp, because while it may make them harder to handle, it will help keep them from being taken advantage of by larger systems. My step-grandfather worked on the Jeremiah O'Brien as a retired volunteer while I was growing up, back when it still ran tours. There was also a submarine you could visit. While he was never in the military, he was a very good mechanic who loved boats. Many of his friends were in the service, and several worked as active recruiters for the Navy and the Air Force. I was allowed pretty much free rein of both the ship and the submarine, and I could navigate them quickly because I was, and still am, very small. This smallness became a selling point. From the time I was about 8, I was bombarded with encouragement by the recruiters to consider enlisting in the future, well into my teens when I had stopped growing at a mere 5 feet 1 inch. I was a very lonely and bullied child. I was ostracized for being just a bit strange overall. Being on the autism spectrum usually does that. Young, lonely, and seeking validation is what these individuals feed off of, especially when you throw in the promise of not just being accepted but actively wanted for an inherent attribute. I'm 32, so I would have been dragged into some seriously traumatic wars if I had fallen for it, which, if I hadn't been taught to question the motives behind authority, I might have. Of course, I'm glad I didn't. I knew that being flattered or being told about all the good things I would be doing meant literally nothing when I would be expected to conform alongside people who didn't share my inherent attribute. There was no real good that could come from blindly following orders. I just came in a more convenient package. That was it. There was nothing else special about me, and if I didn't conform, I would be just as ostracized within that system as I was outside of it. If I refused orders, there would be nothing valuable about me. It was all empty words. So knowing that kept me from being lured into signing my life away, even though I felt like nobody in the world truly wanted me. It didn't matter. I knew they didn't truly want me either. They didn't want me, they wanted a body to push buttons. I guess the same kind of logic can be applied to corporate America, but that's another conversation. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.